So Bison, in one of the ceremonies, he said, I didn't want to die, but your dad would have died if I didn't die. So he took my dad's moment to go, because my dad and him got a surgery on the same day.
When Dog Whisperer ended in 2012, it seemed like the end of Cesar Millan's biggest chapter. After 9 seasons and more than 150 episodes, the man who had become one of television's most recognizable dog trainers was suddenly without the show that made him famous. Soon, viewers began to ask a bigger question. Could Cesar remain relevant without the series that had made him a household name? So, what came next? And how did Cesar Millan build a career beyond his biggest television hit? Join us as we uncover what really happened after Dog Whisperer ended and how Cesar Millan built his next chapter.
Cesar Millan has become famous as the Dog Whisperer, the man who can tame the most untrainable dogs. But now he's being sued, accused of having a pit bull that bit humans and even killed Queen Latifah's dog.
The day Dog Whisperer ended. For nearly a decade, Cesar Millan had been a familiar face in homes around the world. Every week, the Dog Whisperer with Cesar Millan followed him into another household, another difficult dog, and another owner who had run out of answers. The formula had become so familiar that it was difficult to imagine television without it. Then, at 2012, the show came to an end. After 9 seasons and more than 150 episodes, Nat Geo Wild announced that the 9th season would be the final season. The network promoted it as the biggest season yet, with new cases, international locations, and celebrity guests, including Kelsey Grammer, Jillian Michaels, and Hugh Hefner. The final 12 episodes began airing on July 7, 2012. For viewers who had spent years watching Cesar turn seemingly impossible dogs around, the ending raised an obvious question. What happens to a man whose entire public identity is tied to one television show? There was no announcement that Cesar had been forced off television or any long public farewell suggesting that his career was over. In fact, when Cesar announced the final season, he had a message for fans that hinted at something they did not yet know. He thanked viewers for supporting the show and assured them they had not seen the last of him. Still, at that moment, Dog Whisperer was the thing people knew him for. It had made Cesar a television star, turned his approach to dog behavior into a household conversation, and created a brand that extended well beyond the episodes themselves. By 2012, he was already a best-selling author, speaker, product entrepreneur, and founder of the Cesar Millan Foundation. But that was not immediately obvious to everyone watching the final episodes. The show that had defined him for 9 years was disappearing, and whatever came next would have to prove that Cesar could hold an audience without simply doing Dog Whisperer all over again. However, he would not have to wait long to find out what came next. By October 2012, only a few months after the final season had begun, Nat Geo Mundo was already promoting Cesar's next series, El Líder de la Manada. Then, in December, Nat Geo Wild announced its English-language version, scheduled to premiere in 2013. By then, Dog Whisperer was gone, but Cesar Millan was already preparing for what came next. From Dog Whisperer to something new. Just months after the original series ended, he returned to Nat Geo Wild with a very different assignment. Cesar Millan's Leader of the Pack premiered on January 5, 2013. And instead of entering the homes of ordinary pet owners, Cesar was now working with dogs that had already been pushed to the edge of the adoption system. The new series moved its focus to abandoned and difficult-to-place shelter dogs. Cesar brought particularly challenging cases to his dog psychology center in Spain, where he worked to rehabilitate them before they were matched with potential adopters. But the people hoping to take these dogs home were also being tested. Each episode placed several candidates against one another, with Millan watching how they handled the dog, followed instructions, and responded to its behavior before deciding who was the best fit. That was a noticeable change from Dog Whisperer. The dog was no longer simply returning to the family that had called for help. The bigger question was whether the right human could be found for a dog that had already struggled to find a home. Some of the cases involved dogs that had spent time in shelters, developed aggression or fear, or become so difficult to manage that potential adopters backed away. Then, in March 2014, Cesar changed the formula again with Cesar 911. This time, the premise sounded less like a rescue mission and more like an emergency response. The show followed Cesar into homes and communities where unruly dogs were creating serious problems for their owners, neighbors, relatives, or co-workers. Nat Geo Wild marketed the series around people essentially calling for help when a dog's behavior had become impossible to ignore. The cases were also more intense. Episodes featured dogs that barked, lunged, snapped, fought with other animals, or frightened the people around them. Instead of waiting for owners to bring their problems into a controlled setting, Cesar was stepping into situations where the behavior was already affecting an entire household or community. Cesar himself described another change in 2014. He wanted to focus more directly on the humans behind the behavior. In an interview about Cesar 911, he explained that viewers had already seen him rehabilitate dogs, but he wanted to show people taking responsibility for their part in the problem. Within 2 years of Dog Whisperer ending, Cesar had moved from household rehabilitation to rescue and adoption, and then to urgent behavioral cases affecting whole communities. He wasn't simply recreating his old show with a new title. He was testing how far the Cesar Millan formula could go. But soon, one of those projects would put that formula under a much harsher spotlight. The backlash Cesar faced in his career. The new shows gave Cesar a fresh platform, but they also put his methods under a brighter spotlight. In February 2016, Cesar 911 became the center of a controversy that quickly moved beyond television. One episode featured Simon, an aggressive French Bulldog Terrier mix that had repeatedly attacked his owner's pot-bellied pigs. During a training session, Simon got loose and bit one of the pigs on the ear, leaving it bleeding. Images from the episode spread online, prompting complaints of animal cruelty and calls for the show to be taken off the air. As a result, Los Angeles County Animal Care and Control officers went to Cesar's Santa Clarita facility to investigate. Cesar defended the session, arguing that the widely circulated footage did not show the full context of what happened. National Geographic also said the pig was treated immediately and showed no lasting signs of distress. Cesar maintained that no crime had occurred and continued to cooperate with investigators. The investigation eventually produced an outcome that was very different from the reaction online. Authorities reviewed the full episode, inspected the pig, examined veterinary records, and interviewed the people involved. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office declined to file charges, and the case was closed. Investigators said they found no evidence of animal cruelty or intent to harm the pig. A veterinary assessment also found that the injury did not require further treatment. But being cleared of criminal wrongdoing did not end the debate surrounding Cesar's methods. The episode had raised a larger question among animal behavior professionals. How should difficult behavior be changed? And what methods are acceptable when the dog itself can become dangerous? The American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior responded directly to the Cesar 911 episode. In a statement, the organization argued that punishment-based techniques could worsen fear and aggression, and criticized deliberately allowing a dog to rehearse aggressive behavior around another animal. AVSAB recommended reward-based methods and said trainers should follow current scientific evidence when modifying behavior. That disagreement became even clearer in the years that followed, placing some of the techniques associated with Cesar's television work under greater scrutiny than they had received when Dog Whisperer first became popular. However, years later, another legal dispute brought the issue much closer to Cesar himself. In 2017, Lydia Mattis alleged that she had been attacked by Cesar's pit bull, Junior, while visiting her mother, who worked for Cesar. Lydia was a competitive gymnast at the time and later said the injuries to her legs ended her gymnastics career. She did not file the lawsuit until September 2021, several years after the alleged attack. The lawsuit contained another serious allegation. Lydia claimed that Junior had previously killed a dog belonging to Queen Latifah, while that dog was at Cesar's facility. Cesar denied the allegation, calling it false. Because the case was settled rather than decided at trial, the allegations were never established as findings against Cesar. The settlement was reached in 2022, with its terms kept confidential. The lawsuit therefore ended without a public trial resolving the competing claims. By then, Cesar's public image had become more complicated than it was during the Dog Whisperer years. He still had a large audience, new television projects, and an expanding business. But his methods and his handling of dangerous dogs were no longer viewed without challenge. Despite everything that happened, Cesar did not back down. And while the controversies followed him, Cesar was already building something that could keep his career moving, even when television was no longer the center of it. Building beyond television. While the television shows kept Cesar in front of millions of viewers, the bigger change was happening away from the cameras. He was building places and programs that could carry his work even when no network was airing a new episode. At the center of that expansion was the Dog Psychology Center in Santa Clarita, California. The 43-acre facility became more than a location for television cases. It was built as a working environment where dogs could be trained and rehabilitated, with open trails, kennels, a pool, and space for dogs to interact in a controlled setting. The Cesar Millan Foundation now describes the center as a place for rehabilitation, training, and education. Cesar also had something television could not provide in the same way, a way to teach people directly. His books had already turned the approach viewers saw on Dog Whisperer into something they could study at home. Be the Pack Leader, published by Crown, became a bestseller. His publishers also list Cesar's Way, Member of the Family, Cesar's Rules, and other books among his best-selling works. Then came workshops and educational programs. Instead of viewers simply watching Cesar handle a difficult dog for a few minutes on television, his newer training operation gave people the opportunity to learn his approach themselves. Today, his Training Cesar's Way programs include hands-on workshops covering leash handling, communication, behavior, and his approach to leadership. The advanced program even has students work with unfamiliar rescue dogs supplied through partner organizations. That shift changed what Cesar was building. His name was no longer tied only to television but to a training system, physical facilities, educational programs, and a community of followers. He also moved into products that brought his philosophy into everyday dog ownership. In 2021, Cesar became a co-founder of Halo Collar, a GPS-based containment and training system. His involvement went beyond appearing in advertisements. Halo says Cesar helped shape the system and created the training program inside its app. At the same time, his reach continued to expand online. Cesar's current operation includes his own YouTube channel, social platforms, and educational content. His official biography says his social audience has grown to more than 21 million people, a figure that comes from Cesar's own organization rather than an independent audit. By this point, Cesar no longer needed a single television series to define what he did. But television had not finished with him either. Years after Dog Whisperer ended, Cesar returned to the screen with a new show that reflected just how much his career had changed. A new era for Cesar. By 2021, Cesar had been away from his original National Geographic series for nearly a decade. But his return was not a remake of Dog Whisperer. On July 30th, 2021, he premiered Cesar Millan, Better Human, Better Dog, a 10-part series that brought him back to National Geographic and Nat Geo Wild. This time, the setting was largely his dog psychology center in Santa Clarita. The timing was hard to ignore. The COVID-19 pandemic had changed the way millions of people lived, and pet adoption had surged as people spent more time at home. National Geographic described Cesar's return as coming at a moment when dog adoptions were at record levels and new owners needed help building good habits. Contemporary reporting also noted that more than 12 million American households had adopted pets since the pandemic began. That created a new kind of audience for Cesar. Some viewers had grown up watching Dog Whisperer. Others were first-time dog owners who had brought a pet home during a period of isolation and suddenly found themselves facing separation, anxiety, aggression, destructive behavior, or dogs they simply did not know how to handle. The format reflected that change. Instead of Cesar arriving at a family's home, solving the problem, and leaving, Better Human, Better Dog made his ranch a central part of the process. Families came to the Dog Psychology Center, where Cesar and his trainers could work with both the dogs and their owners. The first season included cases involving aggressive dogs, overexcited dogs, and families struggling to manage multiple pets. Even the title pointed toward a different emphasis. Dog Whisperer had made Cesar's ability to change a dog's behavior the central attraction. But Better Human, Better Dog put the relationship between the owner and the animal closer to the center. The goal was not simply to show Cesar fixing a difficult dog, but to teach owners what they could do differently. That distinction mattered because Cesar was no longer returning as the same television personality who had left the screen years earlier. By then, he had a training center, educational programs, books, digital content, and a much larger operation behind his name. His return to television therefore felt less like a reunion with the past and more like a showcase for everything he had built since then. But the biggest question was no longer whether Cesar could get back on television. It was whether he could remain relevant in a dog training world that had changed while he was gone. And what happened next? What Cesar Millan is building now. By 2026, Cesar's work had expanded into areas that would have been difficult to imagine when Dog Whisperer first made him famous. One example was Better Humans, Better Planet, a podcast that allowed him to step outside the usual format of showing how a difficult dog was rehabilitated. Instead, Cesar used the program to discuss human behavior, relationships, animals, and personal experiences with a range of guests. Apple Podcasts lists the series as a Cesar Millan production that ran from 2023 through 2024, with 12 episodes. His media appearances have also taken a different shape. In July 2026, Cesar appeared on Andrew Huberman's Huberman Lab for an extended conversation about raising dogs and understanding their behavior. The long-form format gave him room to explain his ideas in considerably more detail than he could in a standard television segment, including his views on calm, assertive energy, and the relationship between people and their dogs. At the same time, his foundation continues to operate independently of his television appearances. The Cesar Millan Foundation focuses on improving the lives of dogs and the people who care for them through education, resources, community programs, and support for rehabilitation and responsible ownership. That work gives Cesar another way to remain involved in the dog world without needing a television network to tell the story. Then came one of the clearest signs that the Cesar Millan name had become a consumer brand in its own right. In May 2026, XL Brands announced a partnership with Cesar for Trust, Respect, Love by Cesar Millan, a multi-category pet and lifestyle collection scheduled to launch on QVC in September. The brand takes the 3 words associated with Cesar's philosophy and turns them into products intended for everyday life with pets. In the end, the biggest change after Dog Whisperer was not that Cesar found another television show, it was that television stopped being the only way people encountered him. Although there are still serious disagreements about his training philosophy, and those debates have followed him throughout the years, his career itself has continued to evolve. What do you think about Cesar Millan's long-standing commitment to dogs? Was Cesar's greatest achievement Dog Whisperer, or the career he built after it? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.